In a quiet residential neighborhood slightly removed from the hustle and bustle of New York, there stands an old-fashioned two-story house. Its wooden exterior, painted white, are faded in some places a testament to the years of weather it has endured. At the front door, there's a ramp installed for wheelchair access. In this house, I, Julia Brown, lived peacefully with my mother-in-law Dolly, at least until one fateful day. Don't meddle in things that don't concern you. If you can't hand over your full salary to me, then leave. The moment these shocking words left my sister-in-law Marlene's mouth, my world turned upside down. What? My voice was hoarse with astonishment. Marlene continued with a triumphant look. I am the daughter of this house, and you are just an outsider. I'll let you stay if you hand over your salary every month. If you don't like that, then leave. I was speechless at her words. For 10 years, I had devotedly cared for my mother-in-law day and night, and it was outrageous that my sister-in-law, who did nothing but play around, would say such things to me. Anger, sadness, and a deep sense of disappointment swirled within me. I vividly remember the day I married Russell and came to this house 20 years ago. I was 28 years old then. An Italian student who had recently arrived in America, Russell had kindly accepted me. With our marriage, the cohabitation with his mother, Dolly, began. Russell's father had already passed away, and living with Dolly stemmed from Russell's filial piety, as he couldn't leave his mother alone. At first, I was anxious. Living in a foreign country with a mother-in-law who spoke a different language and came from a different culture was daunting. However, Dolly seemed to sense my anxiety and always greeted me with a smile. "Julia, it must be tough getting used to life in America. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask," she would say. Dolly helped me study English and taught me about American culture and customs. Gradually, her kindness and thoughtfulness opened my heart. She patiently taught me household chores and cooking as well. Dolly explained how to make an American-style breakfast and the proper way to cook a turkey for Thanksgiving, taking me through each step with care. "Julia, your soup is really delicious. Could you teach me how to make it?" she would say. Such words from Dolly filled me with joy. We naturally built a relationship where we respected and learned from each other's cultures. Fortunately, Dolly was a very kind person, and we lived well together. Though not related by blood, she became like a real mother to me. However, everything changed 10 years ago when Dolly suddenly collapsed. One day, when I returned home from work, I found her lying on the floor in the living room. Although I nearly panicked, I managed to stay calm and immediately called an ambulance. The diagnosis at the hospital was a stroke. Thankfully, she survived, but she was left with paralysis on the right side of her body. As the doctor explained the need for long-term rehabilitation and daily assistance, my mind went blank. "Mrs. Brown, your mother-in-law will need long-term rehabilitation. She will also need help with her daily activities," the doctor said. Upon hearing the doctor's words, I nodded. At that moment, I made a firm decision. "I understand. I'll take care of her." Russell agreed with me, and I quit my job to start working from home as a freelancer so I could care for Dolly full-time. Caring for her turned out to be more challenging than I had imagined. Assisting with meals, helping with baths, and accompanying her to rehabilitation sessions every day was busy, and sometimes I was utterly exhausted. But Dolly's words of thanks and her smile healed my heart. Having lost my parents early, Dolly was like a real mother to me. That's why caregiving didn't feel like a burden, rather. I viewed it as an opportunity to give back. 3 years ago, our family faced another trial. It was a chilly, rainy day. As I was preparing breakfast like usual, the phone rang abruptly. It was the police. "Mrs. Brown, I'm sorry to inform you. Your husband has been involved in a traffic accident." The moment I heard those words, it felt as if my world had stopped. I rushed to the hospital, but the news waiting for me was the worst possible. Russell had died at the scene of the accident. The suddenness of it all made it impossible for me to accept reality. Overwhelmed by grief and despair, I couldn't stop crying for days. Dolly, too, was struck silent by the shock of losing her only son. Although her body was disabled, her mind was sharp. However, since the incident, she spent her days in a wheelchair, staring blankly out the window. I suppressed my own grief and devoted myself to caring for Dolly. I encouraged her to eat, talked to her, and did everything I could to help her regain some energy. I was determined to prevent her from deteriorating further, possibly into dementia. Dolly, it's sunny today. Would you like to go outside for some fresh air? I would suggest, and sometimes I'd take her out to the garden. We would sit on the garden bench, watching the roses that Russell had cherished, and spend quiet moments together. Occasionally we would reminisce about Russell, shedding tears together. When Russell was little, he used to play in this garden a lot. He would climb that tree and shout, "Mom, watch me." Dolly's voice trembled, but gradually light returned to her eyes. I also shared memories of my husband. Just after we got married, Russell and I spread out a picnic set in this garden, drank wine under the stars, and he told me, "Julia, I am so happy to have met you." Through these conversations, we gradually began to heal. Sharing our grief and supporting each other, we forged new bonds. For me, it was simple, nothing changed in our relationship. I would continue to live here and take care of Dolly as I had always done. But our peaceful days were about to be disrupted by a new turmoil. One day, there was an unexpected visitor. The doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, there stood Marlene. She is my late husband's sister and my sister-in-law. Long time no see, Julia. Can I stay for a bit? There was a forcefulness in Marlene's voice. I hesitated for a moment, but thought there was no reason to refuse, as she was family, so I invited her into the house. However, I had no idea that this decision would greatly change our lives. Marlene was exactly as my husband used to describe her, with a wry smile, saying, "She's much younger and has always been spoiled." Indeed, whenever she came back for New Year's or other occasions, she was very selfish and acted like a queen. Her selfishness was unbearable. Not only did she not help with caregiving, she also did none of the cooking or chores, yet ate and drank as much as she liked without cleaning up. She would get drunk, sometimes hurling insults. It was futile to expect a word of thanks from her. Her usual behavior was beyond common sense. Knowing that I was busy with caregiving, she would suddenly drop off her child and go out to have fun. When she finally came to pick up her child, she would take home the food I had prepared without asking. Even though it was her parents' home, I thought she was taking too much liberty. One day, I gathered the courage to speak up to Marlene. "Marlene, I think it would be nice if we could all cooperate and live together. Could you help out a bit?" However, her response was unexpected. "What? You, who can't even have children, are just a useless freeloader, so you should be doing all the housework to be useful? It's sad for Mom, who wanted grandchildren. That's why I bring my kids over." I was left speechless by her words. I couldn't believe that she could say such cruel things to me, knowing that I had desperately wanted children but couldn't have any. It was unbelievable that she was that gentle Dolly's daughter. I realized that it was useless to say anything to her, so I decided not to respond anymore. We didn't meet very often, and I thought it would be better if I just endured it. While I wished to live peacefully, Marlene's visits became more and more frequent. One day, Dolly asked Marlene, "Marlene, why do you leave the children here so often and come back so late at night?" Marlene replied as if making an excuse, "I started a part-time job because I need more money for the children now." "You're happy to see your grandchildren, aren't you, Mom?" "That's true, but..." Dolly seemed unconvinced. The children were still young, yet she was working at night. I also wondered why she would need to work nights when she wasn't struggling financially, but I kept silent. Then one day, as usual, Marlene suddenly visited. I thought she had come to drop off her children again, but this time she was alone. She came pulling a large travel suitcase, and just when I was wondering what was going on, she declared, "I've gotten a divorce, so I'm moving in here from today." Dolly and I were shocked and asked what she meant. Marlene, looking almost tearful, turned to Dolly and began, "Mom, the truth is, I've been suffering from domestic violence from my husband for a long time. I couldn't stand it anymore, so I decided to get a divorce." Dolly's face turned pale upon hearing these words. I was so surprised that I lost my words too. Marlene continued, "I wanted to bring the kids too, but my husband wouldn't allow it. He only agreed to the divorce on the condition that I leave the house alone." I was confused. I had met Marlene's husband a few times before, and he seemed calm and kind, not at all like someone who would commit violence. In fact, I had seen Marlene frequently yelling at her husband and children unreasonably. However, Dolly seemed to believe Marlene's words immediately. Hearing her daughter's suffering, she agreed to let her move in. "Julia, I'm sorry, but I can't abandon Marlene." Dolly apologized to me. While she said she was sorry to me, I understood that if a mother hears her daughter has been divorced and ousted, she couldn't just ignore it. With mixed feelings, I replied, "I understand." "Thank you, Mom." "Julia, please be nice, okay?" Marlene, who had appeared to be crying earlier, now smirked with dry eyes. It seemed like it was all an act. And so, our life living with Marlene began. However, she continued to do nothing at all, just like before. She didn't help with her mother's care, nor did she do any cooking, laundry, or cleaning. Astonishingly, she did nothing. Moreover, her attitude towards me became increasingly arrogant. But I maintained my composure in front of Dolly. I didn't want to cause any unnecessary worry for my mother-in-law. One day, Dolly spoke to me. "Julia, there's a place I want to go. It's a bit difficult with the wheelchair, but could you come with me?" "Of course. Where would you like to go? Shall we stop by our favorite cafe? It's been a while." There was a cafe that had been our favorite since I married into the family. We used to go there often when Dolly was still healthy. "I also have something important to discuss, so that sounds good." I felt a slight unease at Dolly's words. When we arrived at the cafe, Dolly, checking around to ensure privacy, began speaking in a low voice. "Julia, I'm actually worried about something concerning Marlene." "What is it?" "She's been going out in the middle of the night and spending a lot of money. Something about her behavior seems off." A look of deep concern was evident on Dolly's face. "Also about the divorce. Something doesn't seem right. I want to contact Marlene's ex-husband, but it's difficult for me." I was surprised by my mother-in-law's words. Dolly wasn't completely convinced by Marlene's story. "I understand. I'll look into it." From that day, I quietly but steadily began to investigate the truth. Several weeks later, I had uncovered the entire truth. I contacted Marlene's ex-husband and met with him directly. His story was entirely different from Marlene's claims. Actually, Marlene had multiple affairs. I forgave her each time, trying to make things work. Sadness was evident in his eyes. In the end, Marlene left the house on her own. She neglected the children too. I was stunned. All of Marlene's stories were lies. As evidence, her ex-husband showed me exchanges of messages between Marlene and another man, along with hotel receipts. After learning everything, I told Dolly the truth. She appeared deeply hurt, yet there was also a look of resolve on her face. "Julia, thank you. There's something I must do." From that day, Dolly began closely communicating with a lawyer. She didn't share the details with me, but it seemed she was preparing something. At home, Marlene's attitude towards me became increasingly arrogant. "Hey, make something more substantial. What's with this bland, all-veggie meal? Are you trying to annoy me? I'm making these meals low in salt considering your mom's health. Marlene, you should cook what you like to eat." "What? Don't order me around, you're just a freeloader." Freeloader. Besides, my brother is dead, and you're practically a stranger now, right? Why are you still living in this house? Are you paying rent? If you have a salary, you should give it all to me." What? I was baffled by Marlene's words. It's ridiculous to keep a stranger in the house for free. You should be paying rent and utilities. Rent? I've been living here since I got married. We even paid for the renovations when we moved in, and all the utility bills. But the land and the house are ours. And now that my brother is gone, you can say whatever you want, right? Marlene's words hurt me deeply. I had devoted 10 years to caregiving for Dolly day and night, and to be treated like this was unbearable. Who will take care of Dolly if I'm not here? Don't meddle in things that don't concern you. If you can't hand over your full salary to me, then leave. The moment these shocking words left my sister-in-law Marlene's mouth, my world turned upside down. What? And you have the nerve to say such awful things while I take care of everything around the house. But Marlene just scoffed at me, as if mocking my efforts. Isn't it natural to get money from someone who's not even family staying in the house? It's ridiculous how you act as if you're doing me a favor. You must really be after the inheritance. I understand. If that's how you feel, I'll leave. I couldn't believe that Marlene, who had no intention of taking care of her own mother, was serious, so I immediately called a nursing home. And so it was decided that Dolly would move into a nursing home as I moved out. Afterward, Dolly's health seemed to decline. I visited her every day, cherishing the time I could spend with her, though we were apart. I'm so sorry, Julia. I can't believe she kicked you out. I tried to tell her to reconsider, but she wouldn't listen. Dolly, don't worry about it. Just call me if you need anything. But the end came suddenly. One day, I received a call that Dolly had a seizure due to her chronic condition. I rushed to the facility, but Marlene was nowhere to be seen. Dolly. Hang in there. I called out desperately. Dolly grasped my hand and spoke in a feeble voice. Julia. You really were. A good daughter. Dolly, don't talk like that. We still have time to spend together. Tears overflowed from my eyes. It's okay. Everything is prepared. I believe in you. With those words, Dolly quietly closed her eyes. Despite the doctor's best efforts, Dolly passed away. I regretted not being able to say a proper goodbye or express enough gratitude to her. I couldn't stop crying. A few days after Dolly's funeral, all the relatives gathered at the house where only Marlene now lived. It seemed that Dolly had requested all family members to be present when her will was disclosed. The lawyer Dolly had hired surveyed the room and began to explain. Before I read the will, at the deceased's request, she left a recorded message in her own voice. Please listen. Dolly's voice began to play, and everyone listened intently to her words. Thank you all for gathering here. I appreciate the relationships we shared during my life. I will now speak about the distribution of my estate. While it's not a vast amount, I requested your presence to avoid any trouble. First, to my daughter Marlene, I leave $100,000. Although she did not contribute at all to caring for her parents, she has young children and has gone through a divorce. I hope she uses this for the children's needs and as alimony, so I leave her only the statutory portion. Marlene gasped in astonishment. What? Statutory portion? It's not everything. Whispers spread among the relatives. Marlene is divorced? She hasn't shown her face at family gatherings for years. Alimony? Aren't the kids with her? Wasn't Julia, Russell's wife, the one who cared for Dolly all by herself? Marlene, faced with the stares of all her relatives, turned red and trembled with clenched fists. The atmosphere was charged as the family digested the revelations of Dolly's final wishes and Marlene's true character. Dolly's voice continued. Those of you hearing about Marlene's divorce for the first time might be surprised. The cause was her infidelity. It would be one thing if she were neglecting my care to focus on her family, but she was neither looking after her children nor faithful, choosing to spend her time with her lover instead. Her husband caught her and divorced her, and she lost custody of the children. I truly do not want to leave Marlene a single penny, but knowing her, she would claim her rights. To avoid any trouble for the other heirs, I will leave her only half of the statutory share. I hope she uses it to properly pay off her marital obligations, and that the remainder is used for the benefit of her children. There were gasps of surprise from the relatives, and Marlene's complexion changed. Julia, thank you for coming into our family and for all your dedication over the years. I loved everything about you. It must have been so hard for you when Russell passed away so young, yet you bravely stood by me and cared for me in our home. Tears streamed down my face. To Julia, I bequeath the same amount of $100,000, as well as our home and land. You are free to sell or rent the house, but I would be delighted if you remember the days we spent together there. Dolly, I only heard about the contents of the will just now. I calmly responded. Moreover, Dolly knew about your divorce. She heard it directly from your ex-husband. Marlene's face turned pale. I continued. Your husband repeatedly tried to mend things for the sake of the children, despite your continuous affairs. Though your kind-hearted husband had no intention of demanding alimony, Dolly suggested that he should. The relatives' glances at Marlene were filled with disdain. Finally, I said, also, it seems like you're upset about the inheritance I'm receiving, but you should know that I was legally adopted by Dolly. Legally, I am as much her child as you are. Marlene's face went ashen, and she collapsed on the spot. Applause rose from the relatives towards me. Some were tearful. It's good to see you rewarded after all your years of caring for Dolly. One said, you seemed more like her real daughter than just a daughter-in-law. Another added, if you ever need help, just call us, someone else offered. I bowed deeply. Thank you. It seems that Dolly had gathered everyone to ensure that there were no misunderstandings or unwarranted rumors about the inheritance after I received it. Afterwards, Marlene left the house cursing. Although she had to pay alimony to her ex-husband from her share of the inheritance, it seemed her life afterwards was challenging. Now I am living leisurely, sorting through the belongings in the old house. The lawyer gave me the recording of Dolly reading her will. Thank you for everything, truly. I have always loved your honesty and kindness. Just recalling Dolly's words brings tears to my eyes. I wonder if I was able to express my gratitude to her adequately. Caring for her wasn't something I thought of as caregiving. It was just natural to be together all the time. I wonder if she knew how I felt. Perhaps the contents of the will were her way of answering. If I keep crying, I worry that my husband in heaven and Dolly would be concerned about me. All right, today I'll go to that cafe for the first time in a while, I declared aloud. Arriving at the cafe, a familiar scent enveloped me, bringing back memories of the days I spent here with Dolly. Welcome, greeted a young waitress with a smile. Is it just one today? Yes, I responded, and unexpectedly, tears welled up in my eyes. Are you okay? The waitress asked, looking concerned. I'm sorry, I'm fine. I used to come here often with my mother-in-law. She has passed away now. I see. It must be a place full of memories for you and your mother-in-law, she said with a gentle smile. Yes, but it's my first time here alone. I understand. But I'm sure she's happy that you came to this special place, she reassured me. Her words made me feel a bit more encouraged. Thank you. Yes, I'm sure you're right, I said with a smile, settling into my seat. As I looked out the window from my table, the warm spring sunshine felt comforting. A new season was beginning. You're not taking care of things properly. We're going to live together now, so you, old hag, need to leave. We'll pay $1,700 for living expenses. My sister, Margot, said that with a grin. Upon hearing this, my husband Raphael, who had been silent until now, said, "Oh, is that okay?" "Then good luck with the $7,000 in living expenses," he laughed cheerfully. "What? $7,000? Margot clearly couldn't hide her confusion. It seemed she couldn't understand why the amount jumped from $1,700 to $7,000. Smiling, Raphael said, "Look at this," and showed Margot and the others a detailed statement that explained the $7,000 expenses. Upon seeing the details, Margot and the others turned pale, but we left them to it and said, "Well, we'll be leaving then." After that, we left the house. My name is Penny, and I am 37 years old. I've been married to Raphael for 13 years. We both work and recently bought a new house close to our workplace, where we now live. My parents had been living in a rental apartment up to now, and my sister Margot and I grew up in that apartment. That apartment held many memories. However, the apartment is deteriorating and is scheduled for demolition in 6 months. My parents were forced to move out and were looking for a new place when Raphael suggested, "It's going to be hard for your parents to find a new place now. We have a spare room, and if they think it's a good idea, they should definitely come live with us." My parents are already over 70, and there has always been a constant worry about whether they could respond quickly in an emergency. So Raphael's idea to live together was very reassuring for me. Raphael himself is the second son, and his parents are already living with his elder brother's family, which might be why he was particularly enthusiastic about our parents living with us. My parents happily agreed to our plan to live together. My heart was full of gratitude to Raphael. At that time, as my parents were preparing to move to their new home, they consulted us. "We're thinking of having Margot and her friends help us move. Is that okay?" It turns out when my parents talked to Margot about the move, she responded, "Mark and I will help out." At first, my parents were inclined to decline, but ultimately Margot persuaded them. Hearing this, I was enveloped in mixed emotions. In fact, Margot and her husband Mark live in an apartment just a 15-minute train ride away, and this was their first visit since I bought my new house. Originally, I had told Margot about the new house, but I hadn't shared the details. The reason was that they had been financially troubled and had often relied on me for help, which had started 5 years ago. One day, out of the blue, Margot called to say, "I've decided to get married." At that time, our relationship was normal, so I sincerely asked, "Congratulations, what's he like?" Margot, a bit shyly, happily said, "His name is Mark, and he's very charming. He works as a carpenter, and he wants me to focus on the household." However, Margot's attitude began to change gradually after that. She started asking for money. "Big sister, I'm really sorry, but could you lend me $500? It's been raining a lot lately, and Mark hasn't been able to work much, so we're short on living expenses. I'll pay you back with my next paycheck. Please help." She began asking almost every month. Initially, I lent her money casually, but recently I have stopped doing so. The reason is that Margot has never paid me back. Recently, when I refused another of Margot's requests for money, she furiously accused me. "You're stingy. It's just $500, isn't it? You work for a big company, so you should be able to afford it. Do something to help your struggling sister." With Margot coming to my house, I'm afraid she might ask for more money. The reason is that my house is quite spacious. Therefore, it wouldn't be surprising if Margot assumes that we have financial flexibility. I was looking forward to the day my parents move in, yet I spent my days filled with anxiety. And then, the scheduled Sunday for my parents' move arrived. I was nervous, waiting for the arrival of my parents and Margot and her husband. That day, Raphael was suddenly called into work, so he wasn't at home. As a result, I had to welcome them by myself. After a while, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Margot was standing there holding our mother's suitcase, saying, "Sis, the luggage is heavy. Hurry up and open the door." But wow, what a big house. It looks so grand, I'm envious. "Mark," with a somewhat condescending tone, said Penny, "don't just stand there, let us in." He was carrying a small chest of drawers, clearly struggling with it. "Sure, please come in." In this way, I welcomed Margot and her husband into my home. When Margot was shown the bedroom designated for our parents, she murmured in a low voice, "This is your parents' room?" "It's bigger than my apartment." "Is it really okay?" "Such a big room, I'm grateful, but..." Mom asked modestly. Dad seemed a bit confused as he gazed around. "We weren't really using this room." I assured my parents that they weren't imposing anything on us. In fact, this room was originally intended as a child's room. However, my husband and I have been busy and haven't been proactive about having children for 13 years. That's why we decided to offer this unused room to my parents. "Huh, you could have lent it to me. You're still stingy, sis," Margot commented while organizing our parents' luggage. Eventually, the moving process for my parents was completed in about 2 hours. This was because they had disposed of most of their belongings. All the appliances were picked up by recycling companies, and the proceeds were given to Margot and her husband as a token of gratitude for their help. Clothes and other small items were also given away to neighbors or disposed of. Thus, the room my parents moved into was spacious enough to accommodate all their belongings. "Margot, Mark, thank you," my mother expressed her gratitude. As Margot nodded to my mother's words, she turned to speak to me. "Would it be okay if I come to visit occasionally? Since our family home is gone, I want to see Mom and Dad," Margot said. Indeed, the apartment where my parents previously lived has been terminated. Given Margot's desire to see our mother, there's no particular reason to deny her visits. "So," I replied. "Of course, that's fine. However, I'm quite busy with work, so I won't have much time available." "No problem. Thank you." Margot expressed her gratitude. After that, Margot started visiting about once a week. Curiously, Mark often came along as well. Although Mark is supposed to be at work, he sometimes visits on weekdays, and my mother happily reports. Today Mark has come along too. Since Margot and Mark's visits increased, troubling issues have arisen at home. Things are missing again. Every time I open the refrigerator or cabinets, I notice that food and household items are dwindling. Initially, it was just vegetables and toilet paper disappearing gradually. However, recently, expensive items like the premium ham my husband received from his boss for a mid-year gift and cosmetics I bought at the department store are missing. At first, I thought perhaps my mother was using them, but she said she wasn't involved. "I haven't touched anything," she stated plainly. Really, it's becoming troublesome, especially since recently, it's only the expensive items that are disappearing, I complained. My father responded, "Okay, I understand. I'll also keep an eye out. Please, let's not cause any more trouble," I quietly told my parents. However, after that, Margot didn't respond to my emails, and our household items continued to disappear, increasing my frustration. 3 months passed, and my patience reached its limit. The disappearance of Raphael's personal belongings and mine continued. Recently, a high-end brand wallet I gave to Raphael for his birthday went missing. Margot or Mark is most likely the culprit. This is clearly theft. Margot has recently been coming to our house frequently on weekdays when we are not around, and even if I replenish the food, it disappears by the next day. As a result, maintaining our food stock became a challenge. To address this, Raphael and I decided to take a day off work and have a serious talk with Margot to stop her from coming to our house any further. On the day of action, we pretended to go to work as usual but hid nearby our house, waiting for Margot and Mark to arrive. About an hour later, Margot and Mark appeared. "Isn't Mark supposed to be working?" Raphael muttered to me, but I couldn't answer as I didn't know the details. Just 5 minutes after Margot and Mark entered the house, we returned home. "I'm back," I said that as we entered, and Margot appeared, looking startled. "Why are you here, big sis?" It's a weekday, isn't it? Aren't you supposed to be at work? And Raphael is here too. Margot was clearly flustered. I took the day off because we need to talk to you, Margot, I explained confidently. Mark and my parents rushed to the entrance, looking surprised. I glanced at Mark and said calmly, "Since you're here too, Mark, it's good timing. We came here to tell both of you not to come to our house ever again." Upon hearing this, Margot suddenly became furious and retorted, "What are you talking about? I come here during the day to keep Mom and Dad company while you're away. If you need to talk to Mom and Dad, you can do so at a nearby cafe. It's within walking distance for them," I suggested calmly. "It costs money to talk at a cafe." "I don't have that kind of extra money," Margot snapped back irritably. With a deep sigh, I responded, "So that's why things are disappearing from our house. You've been stealing them, haven't you? I really feel like calling the police." Raphael nodded in agreement and added, "I can't find the birthday wallet that Penny gave me. I was planning to switch it out on my next day off. Can we get it back soon?" Mark was clearly panicking and exclaimed, "We're family, aren't we? Why are you doubting us?" "There's no doubt that Mark stole Raphael's wallet," I declared firmly, yet calmly, to them. "Leave this house right now. If you never set foot here again, we'll forget this incident ever happened. But from now on, we're cutting ties with you, Margot. Goodbye. I no longer want to be involved with those who steal. Although it's painful to admit that we don't have evidence of past thefts, there's nothing else to be done but to let it go." Nevertheless, Margot and her husband were not ready to accept this. "So I won't be able to see Mom anymore. You villains," Margot shouted at me angrily. I then offered an alternative. "How about you live with Mom and Dad then? You can be their companion every day. But remember, you'll need at least $1,700 a month for living expenses." I doubted Margot and Mark could afford that amount. However, as the argument escalated, Margot became defiant. "You're not taking care of things properly. We're going to live together now, so you, old hag, need to leave. We'll pay $1,700 for living expenses." Margot said that with a grin. Raphael, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "Oh, is that so? Then good luck managing the $7,000 in living expenses." And he laughed brightly. "What? $7,000? Margot was visibly confused. She didn't understand why the amount had jumped from $1,700 to $7,000. Smiling, Raphael said, "Look at this," and showed them a detailed statement that explained the $7,000 expenses. Seeing the details, Margot and Mark paled, but we left them to it and said, "Well, we'll be leaving then." We then left the house and headed to a nearby hotel. As soon as we entered the room, we both collapsed from exhaustion. The tension of the situation had drained us both too much. "I'm really tired today." "Sorry for putting you through this, Raphael," I said. Even though it was still before noon, I felt extremely tired. It seems like common sense doesn't apply to Margot or my mother, and their excessive behavior still left me feeling unsettled. Raphael said, "You must be even more tired, Penny. Margot is unreasonable, but your mother-in-law is quite unusual too." It seemed like Mom was turning a blind eye to Margot and Mark's thievery, and she stayed silent during the recent argument. Perhaps Mom believes that she and Margot have done nothing wrong. Maybe she doesn't even recognize the theft as such because it's a family matter. Mom has always favored Margot, which is why she always prioritizes her requests. I was always focused on my studies and didn't bond much with Mom. I studied hard with the goal of getting into a top university. Thanks to my efforts, I was accepted into my first choice and later secured a job at a major company. On the other hand, Margot neglected her studies and was more interested in chatting and playing with Mom. As a result, she only managed to get into a mediocre university and struggled with job hunting. Margot was only hired as a contract employee, not a full-time one. However, it seems that for Mom, the less clever the child, the dearer they are. Mom always favored Margot, even making a distinction between our birthday presents. What should we do now? It's almost like we've been robbed of our home, Raphael asked timidly. It seems he feels unable to take any drastic action because Margot and Mom are his family. But for me, forgiving Margot and Mom is out of the question. Of course we will fight this thoroughly, I answered resolutely. I explained the situation to Raphael calmly. Raphael nodded silently. Having been insulted to this extent, I resolved not to remain silent. I decided to sever my relationship with Mom, just like I did with Margot. Later in the afternoon, we headed to a local law office. A few days later, we returned home with a lawyer. When we rang the doorbell, Margot answered. "Hi, what? Big sis. What do you want now?" "I have something to discuss about the house." "Please gather everyone in the living room," I asked Margot. "Why do I have to do that?" "It's such a hassle." Margot sounded annoyed. "Hurry up. We won't leave unless you do." "We have a lawyer with us," I said sternly. "Okay, fine." Margot responded, clearly rattled by the presence of the lawyer, and hurried off to call Mark and our parents. Eventually, everyone gathered in the living room, which was messy and littered with candy wrappers everywhere. We had cleaned the house thoroughly before we left, but it was clear that no one had touched it since. "So, what's this about?" "I don't really have anything to say." Margot started reluctantly. "Did you come to take back the house? We're living here now, so it's impossible." Mark said that to me with a smile. Mom also spoke to me. "Penny, you and Raphael have moved out, right? I'd prefer to continue living here with Margot and Mark. They keep me company, and it's fun being with them." "Being with you always made me feel like I had to be on my best behavior, which was exhausting," she said with a wry smile. Knowing that Mom saw me that way hurt a little. What was all the time we spent together for? Feeling empty from her remarks, I decided to cut off my feelings for Mom. "Raphael and I don't mind leaving this place at all," I replied. "Yeah, maybe we didn't need this big house after all," Raphael continued. "If that's the case." Margot suddenly brightened up. Mark and my parents also looked visibly pleased. Seeing their reactions, I delivered the final word. "However, there's a condition." "You guys will have to buy the house," I said, and Margot's face fell. "What? You mean the mortgage details we paid before you left?" $5,300 a month. Are you joking?" Margot objected to the amount, but the price was fair. The house is located near the center of town, just a 5-minute walk from the station, and features a spacious 4-bedroom layout. Thus, Raphael and I understood its value and had taken out a mortgage, making monthly payments. The reason for the $5,300 monthly payment was to reduce the total payment amount by paying off the mortgage sooner. The decision to opt for a shorter mortgage term to reduce interest had increased the monthly burden. It doesn't matter if you all don't agree. Raphael and I co-own this house, so if you want to continue living here, you'll need to buy it from us. Now please proceed, counselor, I said, handing over to our lawyer. The lawyer nodded confidently and told Margot and her family. "Here is the sales contract. Please check the amount, and we will need your signatures." Their expressions changed as they looked at the documents. "Why is the selling price $1,500,000? This is a ripoff," Margot exclaimed, trembling. However, this amount was calculated based on the remaining mortgage and was quite reasonable considering the market value of the area. As the lawyer explained the details, Margot and Mark's faces grew increasingly pale. "This is impossible. We can't afford this," Margot said, shaking. My parents were also astonished. They probably hadn't realized the house was worth so much. "If you can't pay, then why have you been squatting here forever? I thought you wanted to stay and were planning to buy it. Now, please sign." "Margot, you can take out a mortgage to cover it, right?" I pressed. Trembling, Margot apologized, I'm sorry. I was just envious knowing you lived in such a nice house. I didn't think it through. Mark also muttered slowly, I'm sorry. But even if I work every day of the year, I wouldn't be able to earn that kind of money. Mom suggested to Dad, we can't afford this high amount. Maybe it would be better if Penny and Raphael live with us. We can eat delicious meals together. Dad looked distressed. I stated firmly, Raphael and I have no intention of living with you after being betrayed once. We plan to live our lives on our own from now on. We are also cutting ties with you, so please understand. I declared this to my parents. From now on, I would have no dealings with Margot or my parents. At that moment, Mom exclaimed in shock. What do you mean, cutting ties? Then, who will give us our allowance, she asked. Dad also looked pale. What do you mean by allowance? Margot asked, standing up and confronting her mother. In fact, in addition to the $1,700 for living expenses, we used to give Mom and Dad an allowance of about $2,000 a month. It has decreased a bit since we started living together, I replied. Margot was shocked, exclaiming, then $7,000 isn't nearly enough. How can you afford to give out so much money? Mark was also stunned. That's because Raphael and I work at a major corporation and have decent incomes. It would be impossible alone, but together we manage, I explained. Shocked by the disparity in income, Margot collapsed to the floor. But from now on, I won't have any dealings with you or Mom. It's your turn to take care of our parents, I said calmly, with a smile. Margot and our parents' faces went pale with shock. Since then, the discussion of selling the house to Margot disappeared. I had anticipated that Margot and our parents wouldn't have the funds. Instead, Margot, Mark, and my parents were forced to leave our house. With the lawyer involved, they moved out more smoothly than expected. Margot and the others complained. To live in such a big house was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, but that was irrelevant to me. Isn't your apartment lease still active? I'll send all of Mom and Dad's belongings there, I told her. Afterward, I arranged for movers to transport our parents' belongings to Margot's apartment. The apartment was quite small, and it was unclear if all the belongings would fit, but that was no longer my concern. I instructed the movers to have Margot pay all the moving expenses. Considering this as compensation for the inconvenience Raphael and I faced, it was quite inexpensive. Even after they moved out, Margot occasionally contacted us. Big sis, I'm really sorry. Can you take our parents back? They're wasting so much money and we can't cover the living expenses. Plus their pensions are used for entertainment. Mark is very upset too. Can you do something? She pleaded desperately. Currently, it seems our parents are living in Margot's apartment. All living together in such a cramped space must be incredibly difficult for the four of them. The fact that our parents were frivolous spenders had become clear after they started living with us, often squandering their pensions on their favorite indulgences. My mother loved luxury brands, and my father was obsessed with alcohol and gambling. Given this, their wasteful spending was somewhat predictable. You were the one who decided to live with them, right? I'm not involved anymore. We've cut ties. Thanks to you taking care of them, we've had more financial leeway since we stopped giving them allowances, I told Margot. Margot responded, That's awful. I'm struggling financially so much Mark has brought up divorce. I need to find a job. Hearing her cry over the phone and knowing how desperate she was made me feel a strange sense of satisfaction. Then find a job. I don't want to be involved anymore. Goodbye, I said, and hung up the phone. Since then, my mother has also contacted me several times asking to live with us again, but I have no intention of complying. Penny, please forgive me. It's hard living in Margot's cramped apartment. The cheap meals aren't satisfying, and I really miss your cooking. Can I pack up and come back home soon? I remained firm in my stance. Mother, you chose to live with Margot. That's none of my concern now. I won't help you anymore, you are practically strangers to me. I'm busy preparing seafood paella right now. I'll be hanging up soon. By the way, seafood paella was your favorite, wasn't it? I'll enjoy it, including your portion." With those words, I ended the call. My mother, a seafood, must surely be regretting her choices now. 3 years have passed, and Raphael and I continue to live our lives unchanged. There have been times when Margot or my mother visited and I had to call the police, but lately it has been peaceful. Ultimately, both Margot and my mother chose divorce. Mark and my father distanced themselves from them, understanding that this would allow them a more peaceful life. Margot, who has been dedicated to her family and lacks income or job experience, finds job hunting extremely difficult. My mother, who has been a homemaker for many years, only receives a small pension. It's clear that having such financially burdened people around makes it impossible to sustain a stable life. Thus, Mark and my father chose divorce and distanced themselves from Margot and my mother to achieve a better quality of life. While Mark and my father have managed to escape the immediate problems, they haven't completely evaded the consequences of their decisions. After splitting from Margot, Mark tried to return to his sporadic carpentry work, but it hasn't been going well. He faces cold treatment from other craftsmen and is harshly utilized, which doesn't bode well for him. With no experience outside of carpentry, transitioning to another field presents a challenging path. It seems he will have to continue facing these difficulties as he works. After divorcing my mother, my father has been wandering from one relative's house to another, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. At 73, finding and affording a rental property is a daunting task, and it seems he will continue to live in constrained circumstances. The reasons for the divorces in the family were made starkly clear when Margot and my mother dramatically announced their separations. My mother's excessive spending worsened her marital relationship, while Margot's divorce was due to an affair. Their financial desperation became evident when Margot and my mother came begging to be let back into the house. We hardly have any income between the two of us, so we're behind on rent and about to be evicted from our apartment. Please let us stay with you." As Margot began her plea, my mother, also desperate, shouted, "Help us. I don't mind if it's just me. Let me at least have some seafood. It wouldn't be fair just to help Mom, right?" At that moment, I had to call the police as Margot and my mother argued fiercely in front of our house. It's likely their personalities will never change. With the police involved, visits from Margot and my mother finally ceased, which was a relief. Since then, my life has taken a significant and joyful turn. I became miraculously pregnant. Now, with my belly quite large and walking becoming increasingly difficult, I've taken maternity leave, planning to extend it into parental leave until our child turns 1. Though we were worried about what might happen, we need to work even harder now. For our child, Raphael expressed his renewed commitment. "Yes, from now on, it's about the 3 of us pulling together," I agreed, sharing a laugh with Raphael. Though I've cut ties with Margot and my parents, I have Raphael and our unborn child. Moving forward, we plan to cherish the family we have right in front of us, not just those bound by blood. I truly believe that from the bottom of my heart,